Welcome to today's edition of Tech Tuesday by Full Sail University. I am Luis Garcia, Vice President of Emerging Technologies at Full Sail University. Today's guest is Lucas Alencar. He's co-founder and head of product of Adopets. And here's a quick background on Lucas. Lucas is originally from Brazil, and in 2015 moved to the US to attend Full Sail University under the Emerging Technology Scholarship. He graduated from Full Sail in 2017 with a degree in mobile development. During his time at Full Sail, he started his tech entrepreneurial journey when he co-founded Adopets, a social impact startup focused on improving pet adoption, its efficiency, and outcomes. And in early 2019, Adopets was one of the 10 startups that were selected from more than 1,000 applicants to be in the accelerated program by TechStars Boston, which is one of the most renowned startup programs in the world. Currently, Adopets serves one of the largest, some of the largest shelters in the US, Canada, and New Zealand, and they handle over 40,000 registered users and manage over 300,000 adoption listings. Welcome to Tech Tuesday, Lucas.
Thank you so much. Hi, Luis. It's a pleasure to be here and to be here with all of you. And what an exciting day.
All right. So for those that are watching us, we'll be going over some of our questions for the first 30 minutes, and then we'll go from questions from the audience. So if you're watching in either YouTube or Facebook, please submit your questions via the comments, and our team will pass that on to us. So just to get started, Lucas, always like to start in the same question, but how did you fall in love with technology, and what did you love the most about it?
Awesome. I always love to answer that question because it always brings me back to video games. And I think that's actually where I started really getting in touch with something that would amaze me. And this is really what tech does to me. So I really started playing video games. And from video games, I was discovering that so many other things could be possible from that. Not necessarily that it would take me to play with, but that could actually be tools and things that could be useful. So I think that this really amazement that I had initially was the thing and the driving force for me to be passionate about technology and always be looking to discover new things and new applicabilities for it across all different areas.
That's awesome. And I first learned about Adopets through some of our common friends, and I was always very intrigued by the business model and by the fact that you got accepted in such an exclusive accelerator like Boston TechStars, and also that it was a distributed company. You guys have employees all over the world, and so for those that are not familiar, would you please tell us about what is Adopets and how did the idea of creating Adopets came about?
Sure. So Adopets is really an adoption efficiency platform. So our goal is really to enable the shelters to be more efficient with their adoption process. So shelters typically use shelter softwares that are 10 to 15 years old and that were not thought as they were being built on the modern moment that we live today, when everything that we talk about user experience and simplifying experience for people to use things. Like if we use Uber as an example, before we would actually here in Brazil call for a cab or would wait for a cab to pass on the street so we could get a car that would get us somewhere. But with Uber and new technologies, all of that became different because we provide accessibility for people. So our goal at Adopets is really to understand the different shelter workflows and enable them to be more efficient through our technology, so we can really empower them and the adopters going through that experience. And an interesting thing about how Adopets started was that I actually got a call from my current co-founder talking about Adopets while I was piling chairs in a Sunday morning for BTS while I was working at Full Sail. So this is a great memory that I have. And at the moment, we were together working on another app, which our goal was really to think about a app for providing mentorship for different people, and we didn't really figure out how we wanted to do that, but that was the initial idea that we have. But at that moment, Arthur, which is one of my co-founders, actually was going through an adoption process with a rescue. And he was for about 2 months already trying to adopt his pet, which is ended up being an albino black lab called Frisco. And that process took more than 2 months and a little over 70 emails for
Wow.
him to get the animal adopted. And while all of that was happening, we were working together in that mentorship app and brainstorming ideas of how that could work. And then he figured that out that this is beyond difficult. Like we would usually have a quick chat about that as he would tell me more about it. But it was really during that Sunday morning that he got the idea and thought like, I think we can solve that somehow. And he called me, and luckily I had my phone, my headset in there, so I just plugged the headphones and continued piling chairs. And we were discussing on that day what could we do to really improve that adoption experience, first from the adopter perspective, which would then later on become more focused on the shelter as a B2B company. But this is really how it started, really to understand how we could simplify the adoption process across the United States and the world, especially at a moment that we had about 1.5 million animals being euthanized each year, which is
Wow.
already much better today in terms of the overall situation. But really thinking from that social impact perspective of how can we create something that can be helpful for people, but also for the community and society in general.
Thank you. What a great story. And I always tell people you first have to solve a problem. Technology is the vehicle, but there has to be
Yep.
a problem to be solved. I get to interview other tech entrepreneurs, and usually our graduates have a different path to entrepreneurship. They usually start up freelancing, and then they get more clients, and then they hire their friends, and they're very organically grow into a business. Your journey is more a typical Silicon Valley type journey, where you guys have gone through an accelerator and gone through rounds of funding, and which is not usual for our graduate base, but very usual in technology. So for our audience, I'd love for you to go over, walk you through the journey of raising money and going through an accelerator.
That's interesting, and I think that depends a lot on the context as well. So at that moment, like I was working at Full, so and I really was decided in terms of uh, not being an entrepreneur, but dedicating myself to create something that would have an impact. And this was what I did stick with. And as we were doing that at that early stage, and at the moment I was like 19 years old, and was also doing full sail, like I didn't know what path we would end up going through. I just like I was just certain that we really wanted to make that happen. So it was natural for us to try to look for money in terms of raising funds, because we were all referencing other startups, especially like in terms of the things that I used to reading and learning with in terms of like entrepreneurship books. So that was the biggest reference to me in terms of making that possible. And because the way that we were thinking about the business model and the fact that we didn't have any money, that took us into that direction that maybe if we tried to get the startup accelerated, that could be a way that people could see us, that investors could be more easily approached, so we could then kind of prove our concept, and from there try to raise money to make things happen, because if we would have to do it from our own pockets, we wouldn't be able to do so. So it was a little bit of survival, and also a little bit of that vision that is more Silicon Valley based, as you mentioned, but that honestly isn't the only way. And there are good things and bad things about raising money that also need to be spoken about. So in this case, it really depends on the context. In that, like in our context, that was the best way and the only way that we had uh, uh, so far to actually make that happen.
Um, Boston Tech Stars only accept so many, and you guys were one of 10 that were accepting out of 1,000 applicants. Why do you think that Boston uh, Tech Stars had an interest in your particular organization or startup that was different from the others?
That is really interesting, and something that we only discovered after joining Techstars itself. So the way that Techstars works is a really clever and interesting way. And we always think that Techstars is looking for new business ideas, new business models, and new businesses that could be brilliant in terms of making money. And that is true, but there's something more important that they're looking at that we just realized later on, and this became the thing that really brought us in, which is who is the team that is creating that? Who are the people behind the business that really want to make that business work and really want to create an impact with that? So, in terms of how Techstars work, they are always looking for the people involved in the business and following them through connections to see like how they actually evolve across the different years. Arthur, which is one of the co-founders, the one that I told the story about, the pet, he actually was working at the moment back in 2018 in Mass Challenge, which is another tech accelerator, while still working at Adopets. So it was really common for us to try to have meetings with people involved in Techstars, with people in the Boston area and several different places. So we could increase our network capability to be better connected, to possibly find investors and really try to advance in what we were trying to achieve in terms of creating the business. So having talented people together that are complementary to each other and really being involved in the community to try to create impact is something that is really powerful. And I think that was the most important thing that Techstars saw in us, was really that diverse team with the quality to make the business move forward, regardless what the business model was.
Wow, thank you for that answer. Um, let's switch gears a little bit about the impact of and you're a social impact organization, as you describe yourself. So it's great, and it certainly has an impact. People love their pets, and you were able to create a great experience to facilitate the process of adopting pets in many parts of the world, as it is right now. So some people will argue then that you bring happiness to people's lives. And what does that mean to you?
That is like that is a little bit insane, if insane can be a little bit sometimes. I'm not sure if that is possible, because it is true. Like when we stop to think about when I stop to think about what we're doing and the things that we are accomplishing, I like as you can see, we have like this poster here, which was a celebration for the 10,000 pets that we adopted back in November last year.
Mm-hmm.
And when we reached this moment, I couldn't imagine, like it's not even possible for me to imagine what is to bring an impact to 10,000 families.
Wow.
Right now, we are a little over 45,000 adoptions, and that number continues growing. And I cannot understand what that really means because I'm not capable of imagining 45,000 families at the same time. Like it's just when we try to think about space and astronomy, it goes beyond what we can think of. But at the same time, this brings such a great feeling in terms of fulfillment that is really what drives me to continue each day, to understand that although I might not even know these people's stories, just the fact that I was able to impact them somehow, helping the shelter and impacting the shelter is really what drives me to move forward and to think beyond. Because if today, like we have 45,000 animals adopted, what could we have tomorrow and then the following years? And it's really about not the number itself, but understanding that these numbers are real and that they mean real impact both on the shelter and on the families and also for the life of the animal, which is the one being adopted.
Wow. That's great. So let's talk about technology. And at the end of the day, this Tech Tuesday, we are talking about technology, and but technology really is about solving problems. Technology is a vehicle to solve problems. So, and there are problems that we solve and the problems that we can't solve. And but I'm always interested, and the artist is interested in this, in the problems that you solve that no one knows about. And as technologists, sometimes you just are very proud of things that no one ever will ever know. So, love to for you to share an example in which you participated in a technology breakthrough uh, that perhaps people don't know about, but you're particularly proud of.
That's interesting. A technology breakthrough. Uh, I think maybe that can be thought in a perspective of really simple problems that when we solve, but like for example, in Adopets, we have many simple problems that we need to solve in order to make the system to run efficiently. One of them, as an example, would be as we import animals from different shelter softwares and integrate with the shelter softwares that the organizations are always using, we always have to map what information is accordingly set so we can show the animal breed, for example. So we can bring animal breed information from all different shelter softwares, and we actually have to translate that into what is going to display in AutoPets. This is a super simple example of a problem that we solve, but that is maybe like 0.01% of all of the mini problems that we solve in AutoPets. So I think that when we think about a technology breakthrough, it's a lot more about compiling all of these little problems that we are able to solve in a product that actually provides value for our end users and customers. So if we were to talk just about that technology that we created to translate the mapping of animal breeds, that's nothing compared to Adopets because that is just part of it. And when we think about the solution, we're talking about like this multitude of mini problems that we solve that end up being a lot complex. And that is what becomes a product at some point to really bring value to people.
I love that example because um, I think actually it's a complex problem to solve. But if you don't solve it, you don't have a service. And
Yep.
and it's particular for every single place that you go. I imagine that not everyone uses the same software, so you got to be able to map the
Yep.
data to what they have. And I love that example because it's something that people will never know about. But there will be no service if you didn't solve
True.
that problem.
And we had to create an entire mapping mechanism for that, which is like a separate product within our product.
Right.
And funny thing is that if anything is set up like in a wrong way in there, a cat could show up as a mouse, for example.
Right.
So like these things are real, and these problems happen as well. It's not as if everything was beautiful and uh, um, things didn't happen. Like we already had a cat showing up as a dog, and we had to fix it. So it's really about tackling all of the things as they happen as fast as possible, so we can ensure that we are moving forward. It's not. It's one thing that is really interesting. I think that I always like to mention is that when people think about us working with technology, they might think about all of the most amazing things in terms of like tech working like magic, but everything is so human driven, and when you look on that perspective, you see the amount of things that are also problems that we need to tackle because of they are human driven. Although the technology is awesome, it's not perfect. So sometimes we might create the most amazing thing, but if this wasn't implemented in the best way, if this wasn't supported by the onboarding team in terms of how we're going to implement that technology, that might not work. So technology itself can be complicated, but when we need to apply that into real case scenarios, it can be a lot more complicated because we need to be a lot more smarter about that too. Uh, uh, because we're not just talking about tech and building blocks, we're actually talking about solving real problems. So it's more human to human than from machine to machine.
That's absolutely for the machines. Data is data, but
Yep, it
for
is data.
humans, data carries an emotional value. And and every time we're working with data specifically, like the example of a cat showing up as a mouse, So technology say, well, that's just a mismatch in the data mapping for the user. You're insulting the mouse or insulting the cat, and there's a
Yep.
whole other emotional value that comes with
Yes, exactly that.
it. So there are other kind of problems that sometimes we want to solve and we don't get to solve, and either because they're too complicated, or at this time we couldn't do it, or we'll do it later, and those are the ones that stay with us, and I always love to know about those too. And can you give us an example of a problem you wanted to solve that you didn't get to solve or didn't get to solve the way that you wanted? I call those the ones that get away.
Awesome. And the interesting thing is that sometimes you can just not solve them right away, but you're
Right.
actually building a path so you can solve them in a couple of years. So this is an interesting perspective as well. I think that a simple problem that using the real case scenario in our day to day operation that we're looking forward to solve now and that we couldn't solve in the past is when an animal is adopted and is returned. So, like, a small percentage of adoptions will not work because maybe the animal will end up not being a best fit for you. Like, maybe they are too energetic, and you just have like a 500 square feet house, and maybe it's a border collie that could be running 10 hours a day. So things happen, and you might need to return the animal to the shelter. So right now, one of the things that we are working towards is how can we be more efficient when we are processing these animal returns, because they had to go through our support ticket, and now we're actually creating different automations so we can be smarter about tackling that problem to resolve it more efficiently for the shelter. So there are always things that, although you might be able to resolve them somehow, you could be more efficient and automate them. And this is part of the beauty of always of that continuous development and the interaction with our customers, because they are going to be the temperature that is going to show you where what is the direction that you should go. And you might even have like the strategic direction from the board. You might have the rest of the team as well with different ideas of what you want to do. But when we talk about technology and in the form of a product, if we're not talking about the customer, we are for sure lost somewhere. So in this case, using that example and tying that up with that technology that we were not able to solve before, but we're working on right now, the customer is the key point to really help us tackle that in a smarter way, and also give priority to that issue in front of other things that maybe we were more interested to do. But now we need to tackle this one because we know how important it is and how more efficient we need to make shelters in regard to adoption returns, for example.
I uh, I I have never even thought about that
Yep.
adoption returns could be a thing, and therefore it's a functionality you have to build.
Yep.
And so the animal have to come back to the system, and I imagine that also means that you have to keep track of the history of adoption of the pet.
Yes. Yep. True. And that is something that is real for every company that exists, like or everything that you might think of creating. If you're thinking of creating an application for a specific problem that you'll be resolving, you are actually diving into that industry somehow. So the more you actually dive into that, you see that there are problems that you never heard of that are going to be main things you need to resolve. And
Yeah.
this is going to be part of what you're building, because that's part of the things that the industry that you're working with have.
That's great. Wow, I learned so much just in the last couple of minutes. So, Lucas, you guys are particular too in the in the sense that, well, it's not so particular now, but just a year and a half ago, it was very particular the fact that you guys were a distributed company. Uh,
Yep.
you are officially headquartered in Boston, but you are all over the world. You yourself are in Brazil, and I wonder, in the world of technology, as you mentioned before, it is about people too. And as a leader yourself, what do you think is I have it's a two-part question. What do you think is your responsibility as a leader in regards to developing and mentoring talent, and how do you do that remotely?
Awesome. That's a really powerful question. So first, in terms of the responsibility, like this is a lot of responsibility, and something that is a continuous learning process as well, because we have people like in Chicago, we have people in Massachusetts, we have people in the Philippines, we have people in Northeast Brazil, Southeast Brazil. So these are real people. Like they're not just pictures from Slack, or they're just not video that we can see on the thing. Like they are real people working together and building amazing things together. So I think that the first thing is really having that understanding that if we're working remotely, or especially if you're hiring remotely, you need to think about how you bring these people and make them feel as they are part of the company, because they are, regardless of how many thousand miles we are apart. uh, Either in terms of doing an awesome onboarding process for them so they can feel part of the company and integrating them as part of the company, but also thinking about retreats. How can we actually get together so we can talk about a couple of things that are beyond work, for example, as we did back in 2019, but couldn't do since the pandemic hit. So that is a real responsibility, and that is part of building that family, building that company, and the team that will really make things happen. And in regard to the mentorship part, I think that the most important thing is really to cultivate an awesome culture, and this is something that is not easy. On the other hand, that is actually hard, and that really talks to the process of building company on the day to day, and not just about things that you might want to schedule every quarter, so we can hang out and talk with each other and talk about other things. But it's really about how can you actually on that day to day help people and have that environment which is open, which is transparent, which is as diverse as possible, that can make people comfortable so they can actually share what their fears are and what their challenges are, because we're all solving the very same problem here and working together towards that. But it doesn't mean that everyone is perfect or that everyone knows everything. It's actually quite the opposite. Like we're always learning. So today I'm learning something new, and maybe Arthur would join to help me with that, just as I would join to help someone else from the team that actually needs support in something that I know better. So it's really about having that open environment so that people can share and work together and show their insecurities and also their fears and what they don't know, so that together we can accomplish that mission and really thrive.
Wow. I'm curious in a company where you have people in different parts of the U.S. and different parts of Brazil and the Philippines, and when you have to do a get together, what do you do it?
That's a great question. So we actually got to record that. So depending on the time that people are working on, we might be able to get like most of the team together or just part of the team. So as everything is digital and happens through Zoom or Google Meet, recording is always a great way to do that. Especially because when we think about a remote company, like we also need to think about both synchronous and asynchronous communication. So what we're doing here right now is synchronous communication.
Yeah.
We're speaking to each other, and whoever is seeing that is also getting that information right now. But for people that will maybe watch this later on YouTube, like this is async already, and they might be able to get the same information that people watching right now can. So when we're talking about a remote company, we also need to think a lot about how we're tackling problems, because some of the things I don't even need a meeting to resolve them. I could just send a message to Andre, which is our CTO, and tell him that we're having this and that issue, and at whatever time he's available, he will be able to tackle that. So we also need to be smarter about how we communicate, especially because if we're not together in the same environment, in the same place, communicating is the key to make things happen. So that is also one of the core pillars to make a remote company work, in terms of understanding how we communicate and what is the best way to solve problems through that synchronous or asynchronous communication.
I had a project many years ago where I have a production team in India, and once we worked out the communication problems, it actually became a really efficient process because they were working when I was not. And so it seemed that we were producing constantly 24 hours a day. Is that the way you use your team in the Philippines?
Not too much. A little bit more right now, because the team in the Philippines is more specialized in support.
Oh,
So
okay.
we have people sometimes serving New Zealand, sometimes serving the US based companies. So we have different shifts in there. So for the most part, they are on when I'm on as well during the day. But when they're not, we also have like our own agile project board in terms of handling tickets and resolving issues,
Right.
so that
So
as soon as they're not on anymore, I can resolve some of the issues that they left, and when they are back to work, they can get the results that the other team was able to resolve, just like you mentioned.
so that's great. So you get the around the clock support.
Yep. Yep, and it's
Oh,
crazy. As soon as we actually went live in New Zealand, uh, uh, the feeling, like before we had Canada and the US, right? So it was like kind of normal work hours, and we also had Pacific time. So, but we would just get things over the day. But as New Zealand started adopting and using the system, some shelters in there, things just became almost 24 hours. So it's a bit crazy as well, to think on that perspective, that things are happening always, like without stopping.
awesome. So we're getting some great questions from the audience already, and so I
Nice.
wanted to give you some from you to you. Um, I love this one. It says, did you always plan on a social impact career, or did you find that passion along the way?
That's a great question. So, and I think that it's for sure the second answer, like answer. I found that along the way, and that is part of who I became at different points in my life, because I was always passionate about not social impact itself, but I always wanted to look things from a more social perspective. But that really started when I was about like 16 to 17 years old, when I started realizing like the problems that we had as a society. And at that moment, I actually started getting involved into lots of volunteer opportunities. And I actually got a lot involved while I was at Full Sail. I forgot the name of the program, unfortunately, but I think I went to more than 8 or 10 different volunteer opportunities that I had the opportunity to. So that really was a building process throughout like my life and in my career, because as I was studying things from that entrepreneurial perspective, in terms of technology, in terms of creating an impact, I always felt that I wanted to create impact somehow. But before really getting involved into more these social challenges that we live, everything was a lot more focused on that standard business and business models of creating technology and doing something with that, but not too much focus on the social impact side of it. And
Mhm.
as I got in contact with more of these volunteer opportunities and really opened my vision to understand the world that we live in, which is full of problems and really complicated ones, if we talk about the United States or Brazil or whatever, uh, this started to get connected, and then I started understanding that technology is beyond just building businesses and making money, but it's a lot more about like what can that work for as a tool to change the world. Internet like changed everything in the past 20 years, and imagining what it can change in the next 20. Like if we talk about the music industry, for example, I was watching a documentary here in Brazil that was talking a lot about that here, in terms of giving accessibility for people, in terms of democratizing that music production, and the rise of new artists that was just possible because of this new type of media. Like,
Right.
and internet was just a tool of that, and other things involved as well. I stop and wonder, like, what other amazing things can we create, like in the entire world, in the next 20 and 50 years, using technology as a tool to solve the biggest challenges that we have,
Oh,
which is environmental crisis, which is on the social side, and so many things that like it's almost endless in terms of the opportunities that we have to make the world a better place.
yeah, we will go there. I actually have a question about that. That's that just so speaking my language there. Thank you for your answer. We have another interesting question from the audience in regards to scale. So, what was the biggest challenge that you encounter when scaling Adopets? I imagine that you probably started with one shelter of a couple shelters, and then one thing is to serving a small sample of shelters. Another thing is to serve thousands of them, like you're doing. Another thing is to serve thousands of them in different locations, in different countries, in different
That
cities.
is an
So,
awesome question, and I think
yes,
it's most likely one of the biggest challenges of startups. The first thing is really the product market fit. Like, can you actually build something that is going to resonate with people and that is going to resolve like a real problem that will make that effective, so you can sell that and make it work. That is the first problem that a startup has. And scale is right after, because if you actually figured out how you make money, and or how you actually create a valuable product, and you can think about scale, you can really expand that beyond reach. So the biggest thing in terms of scale is really understanding from the technical perspective. If we're speaking about the tech, are we ready to scale? If we were right now to scale to a 10x factor, uh, is our technology going to be ready for it, or is it going to break? That is the first thing that you need to think. Second thing is that, all right, maybe your technology is ready to be scaled, but what about your operation? Like, are your processes and how you do things ready for that? Because you're going to get 10x the number of things that you got yesterday. And if everything was being resolved on pen and paper, like, most likely that's not scalable.
right.
So whenever we need to think about it, we really need to think deeply beyond the tech, but really about the process and operation that could make that scalability sustainable.
Is there any particular challenge in that process that you remember from the process of scaling?
Yeah, and we're still in that process as well. It's not as if like we had that figured out. This is
Right.
something that it still is part of what we're building, part of the process that we're living. So one of the biggest challenges that we have is really how can we actually establish specific processes in terms of our operation that if I make myself absent for a week, the company will continue running. Like, how can
Mm.
you do things in a way that if you're not there, things will run smoothly as if you were. This is one of the important questions that we need to ask ourselves. Because if that's not the case, like, you still have challenges that you need to tackle. So, in terms of everything that you do, like if we're talking about customer support and customer success, what are the processes that you have established? And are they mature enough to the point that they are a bit like self-sufficient is not maybe the best word, but I think it can pass on what I want to mean. But is that self-sufficient in terms of you making yourself absent and then still running smoothly, or you actually need to be there so things happen? So when we talk about scale, I think that really understanding what are your weaknesses is the key. So if right now you were to scale 10x, like, and if you were to multiply the problems that you have by 10x, where would you pinpoint the main issues and main problems that you need to resolve, so that when you do it, you won't have to deal with them on that
So let's
same
talk about
scale.
how do you get to that scale. So how do you guys went about promoting the service, marketing the service, and You mentioned at first that perhaps it was more direct to consumer, but then eventually you understood that it was more about serving the shelter, so it became more like a B2B company. So I imagine you were promoting or advertising to shelters. How do you go about, right now you, in a way, perhaps a lot of people know you, but how do you start that process?
That's interesting. So that as I mentioned, we started thinking a lot on the adopter perspective. So everything was about that consumer perspective. How I, as an adopter, adopt more efficiently? We ended up discovering that it's not so much about the adopters as it is about the shelters, because the shelters are the ones processing the adoptions. So the problems that the adopters would have on a customer experience standpoint were more focused on like the shelter not being able to solve them more efficiently because they already have to deal with so many things that adopting ends up just being one of them. So from that moment we understood that we had to shift our perspective and the perspective that the business was being structured, because the our main customers were really the shelters that needed help to be more efficient. From that moment and on, we actually switched the way that we were envisioning Adopets and started looking a lot more on the problems that the shelters had. And as soon as we started doing that, was the moment that we actually started succeeding in terms of a company opening up more and new opportunities for it to actually grow and expand and really build something that matters. And in that perspective, we started getting involved into different conferences. We started talking to a lot of people. We started calling people to understand the different challenges that shelters had, so we can focus as much as possible on the problem to then bring better solutions to those problems instead of trying to simply do something without the understanding of what we wanted to solve. Which is always like what I stick to when we're talking about like a business strategy and creation of new products. So that was really made us click, and that is what got us involved with shelters more directly. Dallas is one of them, and when they had an RFP in terms of a new shelter solutions, we ended up winning that because we were prepared in terms of understanding the environment that we were, in terms of providing solutions to the pains that they had and to the problems that they had. And we have an awesome partnership with them today, and they are one of like the greatest partners that we have, Dallas Animal Services, because we had that contact happening on that if not weekly, yeah, I think weekly basis to really understand how we could solve these issues. And that's, I think, one of the main clients that we have that actually continues to push what Autopets is on the product perspective.
So I have another great question from our audience here, and this is from Lynn in Facebook. It's a two-part question. Is are microchips still using dogs and cats for identification purposes when lost? And does Adopets use that type of tracking data for anything?
Great question. That's a great question. So yeah, microchips are still used, and they are really important, especially for animals that are lost. And we do integrate that information into the system, especially uh, uh, to show that information when needed, both for the shelter or the adopter. But right now, we don't use it specifically for any other applicability in terms of uh, uh, trying to use or gather information from the microchip. So that ends up being more specific to the shelter internally, especially when the animal arrives at the shelter, maybe as a stray, and they check the microchip information to understand if that animal belongs to someone, if they have a microchip, of course, belong to someone, so they could do their work in terms of maybe finding that adopter that owns the animal, or then placing the animal for adoption again, if that's the correct decision.
So I imagine that COVID had an impact in everybody's business, but if it had in somebody's business, perhaps it wasn't yours. And so when everybody had to stay home, the shirt, all orders, I read in several places that people wanted to adopt pets because, especially people that were living alone, and that wanted a company, and shelters have no way to do no contact, and in many cases you don't think of shelters as a particularly automated digital business either. So I can imagine that when that happened, many shelters were trying to find you instead of you finding them. And what was the impact that COVID had in your business?
It had a profound impact, because what we've been building, like, is already there for a couple of years, from like our company in terms of the service that we provide, and of course we have been improving that uh, um, over the past months and years. But the moment that shelters really clicked, in terms of the solutions that we were providing, in terms of helping them to be digital transformed to better serve adopters, was really when the pandemic hit. So we were already working with Dallas, the one that I mentioned before the pandemic, and we were actually working with them to implement a kiosk system for people to arrive at the shelter and turn the shelter into a more digital experience for people adopting. But as the pandemic hit and people could not go to the shelters anymore, uh, Adopets became a lot more important at that moment, because they really needed solutions so they could process adoptions efficiently without having people going to the shelter. And this is really where we were able to help those shelters at that moment, which is really interesting, because now as shelters are reopening and have experienced Adopets in the sense of better operating and doing that more efficiently, we're continue to develop new technologies that now as shelters that are using Adopets are more digitally transformed, and they are feeling ready for us to continue that process as they reopen with the other technologies that we were getting ready, especially with Dallas before the pandemic. So right now, while we actually had a really interesting approach when the pandemic hit in terms of how could we help shelters. Now we're also helping shelters to reopen with our technology so they can continue to process adoptions in an efficient manner that is not going to be specifically remote anymore, but also at the shelter.
That's awesome. So we talked a lot today about people and technology, and working in technology requires not only the skill but curiosity, tenacity. Um, what would you tell someone interested in pursuing a career in technology?
I think that the very first and maybe most important thing for anyone that is interested in technology is to understand that your ability to learn and adapt is the most important thing that you ever develop in this career. Because technology is not something set that you learn it and you're ready for the next 20 years. You might not be ready for the next 6 months as soon as you learn something. So it's really about always pushing the boundaries. So you are always learning new things, because you won't even be able to learn everything. We start about like talking about coding here. It's an infinite universe that we won't be able to talk like 5% of that.
Right.
So in terms of really building a career on the technology perspective, if you're always open to be learning and adapting to the circumstances and to the new technologies that will break the things that you learned on the older systems from 5 years ago, from 2 years ago, you will be ready to always continue that movement, understanding that that is part of what is going to spark your creativity so you can continue moving forward in terms of building new things. Because right now, maybe we're using one technology that will already be deprecated in 5 years, and 10 years ahead, we're going to think about that completely differently. So, if we're not prepared to learn, adapt, and discard the things that we worked on, so we can work on new things and learn new things, we won't be ready to tackle what technology will be in the next 5, 10, or 20 years.
That's great. So we're getting to the end of our show, and I always like to end in the last question, which you already alluded to a few minutes ago, and it's the fact that the world is full of complex problems, and technology is a great vehicle for um, for solving those problems. And I'm an optimist. I feel like my lifetime we're gonna be able to solve many of the complex problems that the world has, and because we are in a time where a lot of technologies that have been in development for the last 30, 40 years are reaching their peak: artificial intelligence, cloud technologies, mobile devices, uh, just a lot of things that are arriving at their peak at the same time. We're allowed to combine them and be able to solve a very complex problem. So my question to you is, what do you see in technology today that gets you really excited about the future?
Nice. I think that it's exactly that. I look at things in an optimistic way as well, like a cautious optimistic. And I think that the problems that we have are so enormous that it's only technology and how we apply that is going to enable us to survive. Like even if we talk like at a higher level as like human species, like we are destroying our planet right now, and we are messing things up in a way that maybe we won't be able to undo. But like I think that with the tech that we continue developing, with the new applicabilities for things, when we talk about renewable energy, about the progress that we're doing with fusion energy that people are working on for like 60 or even more years. And I think it's just a matter of time until we actually continue to further develop those technologies to a more sustainable use, and not just talking about energy, but talking about other things too, like CRISPR, which is that editing technique for
Yeah,
uh, gene editing,
yeah.
which can be insane in terms of solving the diseases that we have. So when we talk about technology and we talk about like our real life, I think that it's more than proven that we were able already to accomplish incredible barriers and incredible issues that we had. Right now, we're democratizing the access of internet and information, like in a way that was never like seen before. And I think this is just like the tip of the iceberg of what we can see on the following years. But we need a planet to do to survive and to continue doing that. So my biggest hope is that we'll really continue to push these boundaries for technology, thinking a lot more now on a perspective of solving real problems than just making money. Because, like, if we just continue to make money and destroy the planet, like, we'll go nowhere, and no one will be able to do that in 500 years. While if we do that thinking from the social perspective, in terms of bringing more equality, in terms of environmental justice, like I think that we can really push the boundaries and survive on the long term, and make not only ourselves happier, but the rest of the world happier too.
Oh, that's amazing, Lucas. A really great way to end our conversation today. I want to thank you for your time. I think the time is the more valuable resource that we can give somebody, because we all have the same 24 hours, and so I thank you, and we appreciate your time with us today. And for those that are watching us over the stream, thank you very much for also giving us your time to be part of this conversation. And we look forward to bring you another episode of Tech Tuesday. Thank you so much, and bye bye.
Thank you.